Hello and welcome to a Careers Masterclass. Obviously, we all love video games, and what we want to know is how we can get paid to love video games. Hopefully, that's what we're going to be covering today. But before we get started, I've just got two important things to run through. So first is to say a massive thank you to the partners who help us run BAFTA Young Game Designers. I've got a big list here. So that is Creative Assembly, Criterion, Jagex, PlayStation, Teazelcat Games, Ubisoft, and Warner Bros. Games. Thank you so much. We hugely appreciate your support in helping us run this fantastic scheme. Now, as I said, we're going to be talking careers today. So we're looking at how you can get into the games industry, what the different routes are, the different jobs that you can end up in. And we've got some really fantastic guests. So we're going to be talking to Declan from Untitled Games. We'll be talking to Yasmin from Creative Assembly, and we'll also be talking to Jodie from Teazelcat Games. So Jodie and Yasmin will be back a bit later. They're going to talk about their journey, and they'll also be joining at the end, where we'll do a bit of a big Q&A on the games industry. But first up, I'm going to be joined by Declan. So hello, Declan. Welcome to the BAFTA YGD Masterclass.
Oh, I'm so chuffed to be here. It's just so wonderful to be in such brilliant company with all the speakers, but more importantly, all of the young people that have just been so fantastic and are finalists. Amazing. So good. Next generation of game makers are right here. So I feel really privileged to be kind of talking to you today. Primarily about just a really high-level overview of careers in the sector, what might be some of your next steps, whether it's taking your GCSEs or whether it's taking A-levels or whether you might be thinking about going and getting a degree in games or anything like that at all. So I'm going to do a quick screen share, and I've got a little presentation popped up together. I'm going to get my glasses on. So let's do that. Really, I suppose the main thing that we've got going on really here is that Into Games, as an organisation, we're here to basically help young people, specifically from kind of ages 13 through to actually getting into industry, with connecting to mentors, connecting to industry specialists, and offering a really kind of clear, wide view of what careers are actually on offer. You're at a really special time in your career basically at the moment where everything is possible. You can be whatever you want to be. You can afford to make any mistakes as long as you know that you're learning from them. We're living in a time when games are everywhere, and we've really only just begun to enter a new world of virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, all kinds of crazy stuff that will make the next generation of games, the games that you'll be working on, absolutely mind-blowing. So over the next kind of few slides, we're going to take a look at what you might need to be thinking about as you approach getting your first job. For some of you, this might be a fair few years away, but it's never too early to be thinking about it and to start planning. We're just going to quickly start off with ABC, which stands for Always Be Creating. You should be constantly working on small projects at this stage in your career, not huge sprawling game ideas, but little ones that give you the chance to learn and improve your skill set without worrying about whether it's right or wrong. The more games you make, the quicker you'll learn. The big lesson here is to start finishing things, or at least know when it's time to move on to the next project. Some people would take years to learn this simple skill, but by starting to do this now, you'll be building a really positive mindset for the future. I think this one's pretty obvious, but sometimes, people decide to make games for other people rather than for themselves, but really start making games that you love. Really, at this stage in your career, make games that say something about you, about your story, or things that mean something to you. When you eventually join the sector, you're going to have plenty of time to be thinking about your target markets and what your players want to see. But right now, you have a really precious opportunity to build stuff that you want to play. So you should be enjoying that. Make games that are weird, that are wonderful. Make games that make people see something about the world differently. This isn't just for you. Studios will actually love to see your creativity shine in this sense. So really try to think outside the box. Let your ideas flow like water. Yeah, don't be precious about them. At UAL University in London, all first-year game students are tasked with making 50 games in the first 12 months of their course. They do this for a few reasons, but one of them is to prove to the students that ideas are something that you'll have all the time. Try not to get too hung up on any single idea. Sometimes you might just have to let ideas go, which can be really hard when you're attached to them. But once again, it's an essential skill to master. We suggest joining as many game jams as possible. You can find a great list of these on itch.io or on the Intergames opportunities section. So if you go to intergames.org/opportunities. We also run a regular game jam called SideQuest. So if you go to sidequest.org.uk, we have a new game jam every 2 weeks. So that's another fantastic opportunity to join a community of game makers. So always remember, always be creating, work on projects that are important to you. It's 100% okay to get things wrong. Everybody does, and just don't worry about it. Always learn from it. Don't be precious about your ideas, and always be asking questions and learning. This is kind of where it gets a bit scary, I suppose. It's understanding your pathway. So, you know, you might not know where to go from where you are, and it can be really hard to know where to start. So employers in the game sector love seeing people that have studied a mix of creative and technical subjects. So at GCSE or A-level, you might choose to study things like art and computer science. It's a really good way to demonstrate the understanding of how these separate subjects kind of work together and rely on each other when making a game. While it's starting to become kind of less important, I suppose, but more people than ever, really, well, to be honest with you, most people in the sector who have a job in games have a degree. So as I say, that is changing, but pretty much everyone's got a degree. And what degree you choose will kind of depend on what part of the industry you want to join. So while it might seem like an obvious choice to do a games degree, that can sometimes go against you when applying for roles. Studios often want to see someone who's a real specialist in their field, and games courses at both college and university level can sometimes be seen as a bit generalist. The main thing is that you do something that you're passionate about. So if you want to get into the game, if you want to get into kind of game art, best thing to do is to do an art degree. If you want to get into programming, you should really look at computer science. You can always carry on making games and building up your portfolio in your own time outside of the course. And I think it's really important to kind of not think of your own career pathway as something that's linear, that just moves from, you know, in a kind of straight line. So it's going to be a winding path. You're going to have lots of ups, lots of downs, and lots of side steps. You might have to go through lots of different jobs before you end up actually working in the game studio. And you might even, you know, once you get to working in a game studio, be working in a different department to the one that you originally intended to work in. So this is Hideo Kojima. I'm sure many of you will know who this guy is, but he is considered probably to be one of the greatest game designers of all time. He basically invented the stealth game and created the Metal Gear Solid series, and he most recently produced and made Death Stranding, which is a bizarre game, but absolutely amazing. But before he became a game developer, he worked as a wedding photographer, a gardener, a handyman, and a beekeeper. He's very quick to say that each one of these jobs has inspired him in some way in terms of the games that he's made. It's good to keep an idea, I guess, of where you want to go. So it's always good to know that, you know, you want to work in the games industry, but you should also embrace the learning and experience in all of its forms and all of the different job roles that you might have before you finally get there, and use those creatively in the future. So how do studios hire? Other than posting jobs on their own websites and social media channels, studios use a range of different ways to find new staff. That could be through kind of internships, internship schemes where someone will work with a studio for up to a year in a junior position. These are often organized through universities for their graduates. Many of the internships can lead to full-time positions at the end of that period. Many of them can't, but, you know. Also, community recruitment. This is super cool. So, you know, if there are already communities of people, games where you, as part of that game, you know, you can build games within it, actually you might get picked up from within that community. So like if you're playing Dreams at the moment, and if you're not, you should be playing Dreams. You might be making incredible Dreams games, which then get noticed by the studio, who then may offer you an interview. One of the designers of Dreams, so a guy called John Beach, originally got his job with the studio because he was a big player of their previous game, like a game they made years ago, which you might have heard of, but you might be a bit too young for this, but it was a game called Little Big Planet. They were so impressed by his level design, just somebody who played the game, that they hired him as a community manager, and his career started from here. And there are actually quite a few stories of that happening through different games and through time. And I think it's happening more and more and more. Studios also use recruiters, who are kind of companies that search for new talent on behalf of the studio. The main ones in the UK are Aardvark Swift, OPM, and Amicus. They have some great information on their website, so go and check them out if you can, with portfolio tips, links to junior positions. They've also got kind of various career fairs that you might attend to in local areas around the country. If you do go to any of those, you're probably best to go to ones that are in cities that have lots of game studios within that city. And you can go to, if you type in the UK Games map into Google, it'll give you like a map of the UK with all the different studios, where you can see the clusters of studios. If there's a jobs fair in the area, maybe you should go and check it out. There's also competitions as well. So, I think the main ones are Transfuser, which is run for kind of university game students, and Search for a Star, which is run by Arvart Swift. So definitely go and check that out if you have some time. A big part of getting the job sector is networking. So that's when you go to events or join online communities like this. You're already in an amazing network as it is. Like, being involved with BAFTA is fantastic. They can introduce you to so many people, and you guys yourselves as well. Actually, it's kind of one of the main skills that you will find once you get to a certain point in terms of your learning, that if you're not great at kind of going out there and talking to people and trying to make opportunities, it might be harder for you to kind of get a job in the long run. So who do studios hire? And we've spoken to so many different studio leaders, and this is kind of distills down into these 6 points in terms of like what they're looking for when they're going to go into those interview spaces. And it's really someone who loves to learn, always be learning constantly. The games industry is at the cutting edge. Everything's always changing, so they're always looking for somebody that can learn quickly. Someone that knows how to work in a team, so important. Really hard to demonstrate sometimes when you're going to interview on your own, but if you've got a portfolio of games that you've worked on and you've worked on those games with multiple people, then you can talk about that when you're in that interview space. I'd really recommend, once again, doing game jams, but maybe doing game jam in teams, and allocating yourself a role within that team, and then using that experience to kind of understand where the kind of pitfalls are around working in teams. So, what it's like to communicate properly, what it's like when things go wrong. These are all really, really important skills that, the more you do now, the better it'll look later on. Someone that has a passion for their specialism is really, really important too. So it's, if you go into that interview and they say, why do you want this job? And you say, because I love video games, that's probably not going to cut it really. Lots of people love video games. What a lot of employers want to see is people that have a real passion for their subject and what they do. And that could be music, that could be art, that could be programming, whatever kind of specialism you decided to go into, really demonstrate it, not just by saying that you love games, Someone that knows how to finish a project. It's easy to start projects. Like we were saying before, it's easy to have lots of ideas. But if you're somebody that can, knows when a project is done, that's a really, really important skill. So, try and prove that by having lots of projects that you've completed when you kind of push your portfolio in front of them. Someone who will get on with the rest of the team. I mean, you need to make sure that, you communicate well and that you respect each other and you respect other people on that team, and you try your hardest to be friendly, kind and understanding. That goes a really, really long way. And then, finally, someone who's got a good portfolio of work. So, your portfolio and CV, it seems obvious, but only include your best work. So many CVs, people, include all the work that they've done, and you don't need to do that. Sometimes you can have a CV that's just, 5 things or even 2 things if they're really, really good. And that's impressive enough. People don't want to see quantity, they want to see quality. If you can look at other people's portfolios that maybe have already got a job in industry, so you just know where to be pitching your portfolio quality. Make sure your portfolio and CV are accessible. So, that's ensuring that if, you're going to be showing your portfolio on different kinds of devices, so, mobile or tablets or desktop, that it screens and shows well, and it kind of auto rotates well, and you're doing it either in a space like ArtStation, let's say, if you've got an arts portfolio, so it's already set up for showing those kind of images, or you might decide to build your own website potentially, in which case make sure once again it is accessible and easy to understand. Keep up to date with your work, so don't give in old work. If you've done new stuff, make sure it's in there. Once again, demonstrate you've worked in a team if you can somehow on that CV or portfolio. And I mean, I'm sure none of you would ever do this, but it goes without saying, don't ever show other people's work. You might have worked on something in a team, but make sure you put a sentence to say what part of that work you did, rather than say you did the whole lot. So next steps for you guys, head over to our opportunities section to go and check out all the kind of latest opportunities across the UK when it comes to game jams and competitions and all kinds of free stuff that you can get involved with to build up that portfolio, and then explore our careers. You know, I guarantee you there'll be lots of careers on there that you've never heard of before and that might interest you. So really explore that area and try and maybe search by things that you're interested in. If you want any kind of instant careers advice, head to our Twitter, so it's @IntoGamesHQ, and then just use the hashtag IntoGamesQA and with a question, any question, and we'll get an industry professional to answer that for you as quickly as possible.
Really wonderful run through there. Thank you so much, Declan, for joining
Pleasure.
us.
That's all. Thank you, everyone. Bye, everyone.
So next up, we have Yasmin from Creative Assembly. Hello, Yasmin. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me, and congratulations everyone for being here. It's cool.
So I want to start off by getting you to introduce yourself. So tell us a little bit about what you currently do.
Yeah, so I'm an associate game designer at Creative Assembly, working on a new IP, so can't say anything.
I love that. It's always so secret, isn't it? I'm always like, what are they doing? And they're like, well, I can tell you in like 5 years.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into games. You know, what kind of your first introduction just as a player was to games, and then why you decided to move into the industry.
Yeah, well, so listening to Declan was actually really interesting because it turns out I did quite a few of those steps without even realizing. So those tips are very good. But yeah, I think it all started for me when I was back in college, which I'm guessing a lot of you guys are probably college age. I did like an all-round media course, and that included writing and radio and video, film, all those kinds of things. And I wondered why video games weren't a form of media, because, well, they obviously are a form of media. So I just asked my lecturer, like, why aren't we doing video games alongside all these different formats? And they explained that it's just very hard to make a video game. Who knew? You know, maybe you can't do that in 3 months, but maybe you can. So I just asked if I could do that instead of a unit that was planned out for me, and I got sent to another college. And after doing that, I realized it kind of sparked this whole new interest. But yeah, that was kind of the moment where I realized that if I had a question about anything, or if I was curious about anything, I should always dig into that further and find out why and what makes it work and how maybe it could be better for you as a person. And I think as a game designer, that trait really helps you when you're designing anything. So that was like the very start of it.
So why did you pick your kind of discipline? Because, you know, there's, as we've seen, there are so many different roles. So, you know, how did you kind of hone in on exactly what you wanted to do? Because sometimes I know that's the thing that feels most difficult, most daunting at the beginning of your game design journey.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that took me years. So I've only been in the games industry for not even 2 years yet, but it took me so long to know what I wanted to do, or even if I definitely wanted to go into the games industry, because you hear about how difficult it is and all these things, and I just wanted to tell stories, but using technology. So, I mean, it makes sense now, but back then I wasn't sure. So I actually didn't go to uni. That was one of the best decisions I made. I didn't go to uni first of all. I did later on, but when all my friends were going, I decided to get an apprenticeship learning web development instead, just to see if I liked the technical side of like storytelling and stuff. Because if I started to learn code and I absolutely hated it, then I know I haven't wasted my time trying to learn something more technical.
What did you kind of decide to look into early on? So obviously you mentioned a couple of bits there, but how did you actually kind of actively think, okay, this is the bit of a game I like, this is the bit of game design I don't like? What were you kind of physically going out and doing to narrow that down?
So when I got my job as a web developer, I started to just play around with the code that I was learning, because I was learning how to make websites, but I also understood that websites are an interactive medium and I could possibly make that into something fun, and you can gamify pretty much everything, right? So I was gamifying just making like little bat and ball games, and I was also making click-through websites that would tell a narrative. I started up a YouTube channel, and I also got involved on the side in journalism, but for free, just so I could, so it was for a website called Game Skinny, and I could interview game developers, find out more about them. And then because I started something on my YouTube channel, it actually was teaching me from a young age how to finish projects, because I was trying to get out some content, and usually it was based around games, my thought on games. I'd play a new game and I'd give my critique on it, and then afterwards I would go to the journalism and I would kind of like talk to these developers and pick their brains, because that's what I wanted to do at the end of the day.
So which for you was most useful? What were kind of some of the things that you found most useful to try out during your journey?
I guess the game journalism definitely was, even though it wasn't making games, it was getting my foot into a door. It was talking to developers and understanding their mindset and different softwares and everything else. And that helped me solidify that I definitely wanted to go into the games industry. And eventually, I think it was 2 years after starting my web dev career, I decided to go to university and study computer game arts. I knew how to code, so I kind of fell into the game design role, and I absolutely loved it. And I had so many artists, because I was in a class full of artists. So it was interesting, because I came out of a computer game arts degree, but with more game design and programming knowledge, just because it was lacking.
If you can, because again, sometimes this is just a secret, can you talk about the process of you applying to and being hired by Creative Assembly? Because obviously that's something people will be interested in.
So after I finished up university, I kept on working on the game, my final game, and I got all the kind of kinks out that I wanted it to have, and then I uploaded it to itch.io. And so I had a game, and I also made a video show reel of everything that I had done, and then I was just applied everywhere. So like Declan said, I applied for QA, I applied for community manager. Even though I knew I wanted to be a game designer, I wasn't picky. I just wanted to get into the games industry, and also it would be nice if I could work with a team that I admired and I looked up to. So I tailored every single application to the company that I was writing to. So it did take like a full day to send out one of them, because I would just do a lot of research. But yeah, once I was lucky enough to see that Creative Assembly was having a traineeship for a game designer, which they do a lot of traineeships for many different roles, from animation to environment art, game design. And I applied, and it did take a couple of months to hear back. But when I did, I was like, it's amazing. And yeah, I went for an interview. And I will say, from the interview process, it's very scary, but just try and stay true to yourself and stay passionate and excited. And if they ask you any questions, they're more than likely it's going to be a trick question, and they just want to see how your brain works. So they want to see you try and figure out the answer to the question. That's more what they're looking for than a right answer, because a lot of the time there is no right answer.
So what's a day in your life like now in the role that you're in?
Well, I love working in my company because they're quite flexible with times. You can come in really early if you want, or a little bit later. I mean, they're not that flexible. So I would, So I would always come in quite early, because I started my traineeship anyway as a technical designer, which is a designer that helps to create tools for other designers and other people on the team, kind of make their lives a bit easier. So a lot of the time I will have like people asking me questions, which is great. I mean, if they ever watch this, like, hey, yeah, I love you. But I come in early, so they're not there, so I can get some work done when they're not around. And then there's a stand-up. So everyone will talk about what they did the previous day, what they're going to work on today, and get a little bit of time just to talk to people if they need to. And then being a designer, you do have to play regularly. So that means usually daily play tests. And from those play tests, sometimes there'll be a discussion afterwards, sometimes not, because it is every single day, obviously. And yeah, then just work and chat in between.
Okay, well, I mean, you've made that sound a little bit too dreamy. I basically said, what's your day like? And you were like, I turn up, I play some games.
I play some games all day, just talk to people.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, what have you found to be negatives of working in the game industry? Is there anything that, you'd perhaps warn somebody who was setting out on this journey to say, hey, it's not all just turning up when you like and playing video games?
Yeah, no, it's definitely not that. I think the biggest thing to realize once you get into the industry is, especially if you've been doing what everyone tells you to do beforehand, which is to make a lot of games and to get projects done and stuff like that, which is good, please do that. But once you get into the industry, it's not like that. You spend a long time on tiny, tiny specific parts of the game. And that's good and bad, because you just kind of have to be patient sometimes. And sometimes maybe you'll work on something, and if you're working on something by yourself or with a small team of your own, that work, it's going to get done. But if you work on something in the games industry, sometimes it won't make it into the game, but that's okay, because you'll get something different to work on probably next week. So yeah, it's just little things like that.
All right, that still didn't sound too bad. So hopefully we haven't hugely discouraged anybody.
No.
So this is probably going to sound a little bit like an interview question in itself, but one of the things I find really interesting about the games industry is that everybody has a very varied career path. I think it's not quite as straightforward as some other industries. So where do you kind of see yourself in 5 years? No, where do you kind of see yourself, moving forward? Do you have an idea of where you'd like to be in 10 years, in 20 years? Or is it more, you're kind of going with the flow of what interests you, new things you learn, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, but I have been talking actually to my lead about this recently, because that's what you do. You have one-to-ones and say, how do you want to progress in the industry? For me personally, I know my initial interest in games was to tell a story, and now I'm a game designer, and I'm very kind of technically minded. I would love, so this is the weird thing about game designers as well, there's a lot of different types of game designers. So you have like level designers, tech designers, and all these different types, but I would love to kind of maybe transition to more of a technical narrative designer role. So work closely with a writer to talk about the nuances of how you bring the game world to life, through little things like how the player might interact with the environment as they walk past, or maybe some lights that will like appear, tiny things. That's what I'd like to do in the future.
So I think that for me sounds like a role I would love to. I think it sounds, it's definitely a kind of bringing together of narrative and design in a way that's very unique to our industry. I think it's, definitely a really interesting role.
Absolutely. I think BioShock does it amazingly as well. Just showing a player where to look without forcing them to look. That's the trick. And yeah, they do it amazing.
Yeah. Well, my last question for you is, what is kind of your number one tip to our young game designers? What would you say, this is my one big piece of advice for you as you head out into our industry?
That's so difficult.
Sorry, it's such a big question, I know. I have to do it.
Well, I would say the obvious, which is don't give up and keep making. But I think if they're already here, I'm assuming they're going to do that anyway, because they obviously really like making games and they're good at it. So what I will say is everything that you do, think about it from the perspective of a potential employee. So you've made a game, how is that employee going to see it? You're going to a game event. Is there a way that you could network with the people at that game event? So always think about prospective employers and what you can do to make yourself more available to them.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really love chatting with you. You've had a really interesting journey. So yeah, really great advice there. Thank you very much for joining us, Yasmin.
Thanks. I'll stick around till the end.
Definitely. So next up, we are joined by Jodie from Teazelcat Games. Very excited to have her here. She and I both joined the BAFTA Games Committee recently, which is very, very exciting. So welcome, Jodie, to the BAFTA YGD Masterclass.
Hello.
There we go. Hello. Oh, I like your background. That is a very nice background.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's covered in Monster Hunter figures. So yeah, we play a lot of games. Yeah.
So, Jodie, really excited to have you here. Tell us a little bit about what you currently do.
So currently I run my own game studio called Teazelcat Games. It's a super small team, which is very different from places I've worked previously. But because it's a small studio, I get to essentially do what a lot of you YGD finalists have done. You've made a game by yourself or in a small team, but I've got to think about selling the game. So I've also got to think about marketing the game to potential players, and do it on a bit bigger of a scale. But it means that I'm doing a lot of different roles in my current position. So I run the studio, but this is our first game. So it's my game idea. So I had to come up with that and go, okay, is this a game that people will want to play? And then do some of the game design, a little bit of the writing, a lot of the art and animation. And then for anything that I am not so great at, I hire or I bring in contractors to work on the game. So it could be music composition, someone to write all the dialogue, other artists who are a lot better than me at creating characters and environment. So yeah, it's a lot of fun because I get to have lots of different hats and do lots of different skilled areas. But it's definitely a lot of work to sort of juggle all those different job areas.
I mean, I don't dare to ask your routine because it feels like you do a little bit of absolutely everything. But how did you end up here then? Because, you know, it seems like there's a lot you need to know to do the job that you do right now.
Yeah, so I've been in the games industry for about 12 years now. And for the majority of that, I was working for other studios, making games designed by other people. And I had one very specific job at a time. So I didn't have to think about the game design. I just focused on my role. So I started off in the industry as an animator. So I'd animate the characters in games. And I did that for about a year. But before entering the industry, I went to university and studied. It was a very interesting course because it combined programming, maths, and 3D art and animation. Because those were the things that I was interested in. I was really interested in the technical side and the creative side. So I'd studied programming and maths, but because you need to have a specific role entering the industry or working at a studio, I'd chosen to start with animation. So I was like, okay, I enjoy animation and I'm fairly good at it. But after a year of doing animation and working in the industry, I realized actually my technical skills are really valuable. Because I'd been working with programmers, I'd been working with designers and everyone else on the team. And those technical skills had allowed me to communicate my ideas for the animation to all these other different departments. So after a year, I changed studio and changed my job role and became a technical animator. So I was building tools for creating animation, doing more technical tasks such as creating cloth dynamic. So getting the clothes on a character to follow the movement without you having to hand animate every single flick as the character turns, and supporting the animation team to make sure the animation in the game looked how they wanted it to. So I worked at that studio Rebellion for 3 years as a technical animator before moving to Creative Assembly, so the studio where Yasmin now works. And I started there as a character rigger, technical animator, doing similar work to what I've been doing previously. And they didn't have anyone looking specifically at technical art, so the technical side of how the art was created in games. So because I had this technical understanding of how animation worked, and I had a background that had covered modeling and various bits of art, I sort of put myself forward of, oh, I can help out with the technical art. And I ended up building up the technical art department, hiring some more people, and ended up creating the technical art department and becoming the technical art director for the series Total War, which is has some BAFTA nominated games. And yeah, working on lots of the technical art aspects of the game, such as the visual style on the engine side, talking to programmers, making tools to make it easier for artists to create art. And at Creative Assembly, I was working with a team of up to 90 artists supporting different art roles. And the whole studio was about 500, maybe 550 people. So that was a huge studio. And then I spent over half my career working there, and then decided, actually, I want to try making my own game ideas. And that's how I ended up founding Teazelcat.
So what is it like day to day to run a studio?
Oh, I think
maybe week to week, I might say, because that's probably
yeah. I mean, it does change day to day, I think, because I do wear so many hats. It's good to kind of have a role for each day so that you don't become overwhelmed going like, oh, I have to fix this bit of the programming, but this bit of art needs to be done, and I need to update this marketing document. It's best to go, right, it's Monday. What's important? What does my team need? Is there anyone waiting on me to do some work? And if not, then I've kind of got the luxury to go, what's the highest priority for the project? And if I'm having a bit of a rubbish day, it might be like, oh, well, what can I do that will be fun? And I can just like get a little pick me up of like, oh, I can just finish off that little bit of art, and then it's in game, and then I can see it and go, yay, I finished something. I think the long running thread throughout the project is kind of either getting a producer who is sort of there on top of when we should be delivering things, when we should have finished certain features by in order to move on to the next part, or making sure that you've made a small enough project and that you're keeping track of it and that you're on top of deadlines. Because I think it's very easy to start off with an idea, like, okay, I've got this little game that I want to make, and you start making it, and then you get a bit carried away. Oh, I can add this feature, and oh, wouldn't it be cool if I added flying creatures? And then it just slowly adds bits of work to it. Having a clear understanding of everything that needs to go into game when you start is really useful as well, because it's easy to go, okay, I know what the visual is going to look like, and get halfway through the project and go, I haven't even thought of music. Right, what sounds are people going to hear when they're playing the game? So I think having a clear sort of idea at the start of everything that will need to go into the game, and then day to day that will change depending on where you are in the project and what needs to be done with the rest of the team.
There's obviously, a big jump up between when you're making games at home for yourself or for your portfolio or for a game jam, and then when you're making games that essentially need to make money. So how does game development, how does game production change from both kind of a technical side and a creativity side, when actually, at the end of this, people need to buy it? It's not just me and my mum playing it.
Yeah. When you're working for someone else, so when I was working in bigger studios, working on other people's game ideas and getting paid, you don't have to think about marketing. You don't have to think about where the money's being spent or how you'll pay all your employees or even just yourself. Running a studio adds a whole nother level to what you need to think about. So the first thing is, how do I afford to make the game? Because if you're hiring other people, then how do you pay their salaries? You need to pay yourself, because you need to pay bills, you need to feed yourself and keep a roof over your head. And you also need to be thinking about marketing of the game from very early on. So you might not be sharing screenshots of your game from the beginning. You might not be telling everyone about your game when you first start it, but you've got to be thinking like, at what point do I start shouting to the world that, hey, I'm making this really awesome game and it's going to be out in 3 months, 6 months. So you have to think about like, what is your unique selling point? Like why will people why should people buy your game? So that when it comes to announcing your game, you're ready with the really cool screenshots that tell people, like, this is how cool our game looks, and this is how fun it's going to be, and this is why you should buy our game when it comes out. So yeah, it's definitely, you definitely have to think more about the business and financial side, and marketing and community when you're doing everything yourself, rather than just thinking about making a game and finishing it.
Well, finally, I'm going to do what I did to Yasmin and put you on the spot again and say, what is your one top tip for our aspiring game designers? Sorry.
It is a difficult one. I think always be creating. Like right back to Declan's talk. We are creative people. Whether you're an artist or you work in music, whether you're a designer or a programmer, they're all creative roles. And the games industry is changing very fast. And I think you can see that as scary, but I see it as really exciting. We're never held back too much by what technology can do. And there's always exciting new things to explore, whether that's a different piece of software or trying out a different skill. And there's so many things online now that can help you make video games. So if you are an artist, yeah, you can try a little bit of writing. You can try to program. And I think if you have a specialization now, and you're a specialist in art or a specialist in programming, there's never anything stopping you from trying another discipline or trying different skills. You might decide that it's not for you, but it gives you a little bit of understanding of how those different job roles work, and it gives you a bit of understanding about the other people on your team.
Well, thank you so much. That was, I mean, you do a little bit of everything, so I can't possibly imagine how that could not have been more helpful. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Jodie.
Cheers.
So now I'm going to interview myself, I think is what's happening. So I've also been asked to talk to you for a little bit. First up, let me just excuse my darting eyes, because I also have to keep track of the time to make sure we fit everything we want to in. But I'm going to chat a little bit about what I do. So fundamentally, I'm Elle Osili-Wood. Hello. I'm a games presenter and journalist. So what I do is talk about video games, usually on television or the internet, or I'll write about them for newspapers and magazines. So alongside that, I also do a couple of other things. So I make small games myself. I released my first game, The Missing Locksmith, earlier this year. And I also voice video games. So that's usually kind of indie titles. I will pop up in those as a voice, as a character. So they're the kind of two things I do alongside that. But what I mainly do is talk about video games. It's great. I love it. So I got into it kind of an interesting route. I actually started out in politics. And from there, that's what I studied at uni. I studied politics. I also minored, which is when you can take another course alongside your main course at university. I minored in computer science, which is where I learned to code, which is where I learned to be able to make games. But my degree is in politics. So I went from there, I went and worked at the BBC, and I worked as a political journalist. And as it turns out, games are a lot more fun than politics. So I asked at the BBC, if I could cover video games on the side. This is something I always recommend is, you know, sometimes you, even though I loved working at the BBC, sometimes you're in a job and you think, oh, there's something else I'd like to do, but I don't quite know if, you know, there's a job out there for me in that, if I could make money doing that. You know, when I started at the BBC, this was a long time ago, it was, you know, a decade ago, some of you are only that old, and, you know, it was not, you know, people didn't talk about games as much as they talk about games now. So when I wanted to be a video games presenter, I didn't really know who would hire me. So instead of just leaving my main job, what I did was I said to them, look, people are really interested in video games. It doesn't get talked about on television very much. Can I, alongside my politics work, also talk about video games? Can I also go and find interesting story about the games that are being built in the UK and things like that? And they said yes. So for me, that meant that I could do what a lot of you are doing now and start building up a portfolio. So this meant that I had stories on the BBC, stories on television. I would go on BBC Breakfast and say, hey, you know, we've had this game in the UK and it's been really successful. And this is why the UK is very, very good at making games. And it meant that when other shows, other channels needed somebody to talk about games, I could pop up and say, you know, hello, I'm here. Here's my portfolio, you know, with everything that anybody needed to know whether or not I was good at it. So that's something I hugely recommend. You will have already had that advice from BAFTA, I'm sure. But portfolios are very, very important because these days people are using kind of the internet, social media more and more to try and recruit people, to try and find new talent. So what you need to do is make sure that your stuff is out there. So for me, that was creating a website where I could put my written work. That was putting all of my other work on YouTube. And, you know, if I loved a game and nobody wanted me to write about it, I'd make a little video and I'd put that on YouTube. So it meant that when people were looking for somebody who could talk about games, they would stumble across my work. So that's something I always hugely recommend. And eventually I was doing enough little bits of work outside of the BBC that I was able to leave and go freelance. So again, another step I always recommend taking is, you know, waiting until you've done enough work outside of kind of your main role, whether that's at uni, whether it's when you're post-uni and you get your first job and it's maybe not exactly what you wanted. You know, you don't have to jump out of it straight away. You can stay in it, you can do work on the outside, particularly in the games industry. There's lots of kind of little bits of work you can do alongside a job. And you can build up a portfolio until you're ready to take that big step of jumping into the industry. So that's what I did. So that's what I do. I'm going to finish up with a couple of tips that I think have been most important for me in my career. So the first one sounds very cliche. It sounds like something that would be in like a lovely Instagram picture with terrible font and flowers around it, but it's be brave. So for me, my biggest successes that I've ever had have come from sending somebody a wild email and saying, you know, I've seen your television show covers arts, covers films, covers TV, can I come and talk about games? And actually you'll be surprised how often people say yes. You know, these big opportunities, sometimes they're not going to come to you, you need to go to them. And you can be scared and you can think, oh, why would they pick me? But I can promise you that somebody who isn't as good as you are is emailing them every day to say, can I come on your show? So if you are good enough, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be what I do. It's, you know, in any part of the industry, you know, whether you want to go and see if you can find an internship, whether there's a game writer you love and you'd love to perhaps get some advice for them, be brave. As long as you're polite, as long as you're respectful, as long as you have a portfolio of work that you can show off, contact people and just kind of, you know, put yourself out there, be brave, ask for opportunities, ask for big chances. And as I said, you'll be surprised how often people say yes. And then my last tip is just make yourself really visible. So I get by far, probably 90% of my work comes through social media. I get emails every single day. I'm able to do my job full time talking about games because people find me on social media and they come and they ask me to do work for them. So I cannot stress enough, you know, some of you might not be old enough for social media, so this might be a tip for a little bit later when you are old enough to be on it. But don't worry, the work will still be there. You need to set yourself up a Twitter and Instagram if appropriate. You need to set yourself up an online portfolio. So obviously be careful on these sites. Not everybody on them is great, but if you're mainly using it as your portfolio, you know, this is a great way for people to find you. Lots of games jobs get posted on Twitter. Lots of games jobs get posted online. So you need to make sure that where people are looking, they can find your work. So I cannot stress enough, making sure that you have, you know, you're being safe online, but that you are putting yourself out there and you're putting your work out there and you're perhaps tweeting about your new project you're working on. You're sharing screenshots with the hashtags that go around on Twitter for game developers to share. They're kind of screenshot Saturday of what they're currently working on, things like that, that just mean people are kind of checking out your work, keeping an eye on what you're up to. So those are my big 2 tips for anybody who is interested in kind of jumping into the games industry, whether that's what I do, which is games journalism, or whether you're perhaps looking to go into game design. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to bring back Yasmin and Jodie. So we're going to have a little bit of a chat. We're just going to talk a bit more generally about the industry and give you a few more tips before we finish up for the day. So Jodie and Yasmin, if you could please reveal yourself back to our YGD finalists. Ah, gorgeous, here you are. So one of the questions that we have is, what tips do you have for making sure that you get a product finished and to continue working on a project while staying motivated?
I think it was someone from Nintendo suggested, look at how much can you take away from your project while it's still being fundamentally the same product you're making. what can you cut back on? So all the frills, it might be what features are really nice, like they sound exciting, but you don't need that for it to be the game idea you've got in your head. But yeah, being able to think about it of like, what's the core of the game? What makes it this unique product? And what bits could I get rid of if I need to?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You have to have these game pillars and know what they are, and know what the game kind of stands for. But one thing for me, because I am working on my own stuff alongside work as well, and that can take obviously a long time because there's a lot less time to do it, and it can sometimes feel like it's going nowhere. So I'll always have kind of like a checklist that maybe I want to try and get done by the end of the week. And even if you haven't checked everything off, you can see that you've done maybe 2 or 3 of those things, and it just keeps you motivated. And also, if you want to, if you're brave enough, like you said, Ellie, you can post it online, and that will help you hold yourself accountable, because you're showing little clips here and there, and you have those small wins, which just keeps it fun.
So a question that we had from Dylan Hart is, when making a game idea document to present an idea, is it good to compare the idea to existing games to better explain your point?
I think if you're pitching to someone else, then I think it is beneficial, because especially if you've just got the game design document and you've not created a prototype or anything, it just helps people in their minds sort of like have a better understanding of your game. It's still important to not make it sound like, okay, this is my version of Pokemon, but I've created my own creatures. You still need to make the uniqueness of your game stand out. But yeah, I think sort of having like, oh, it's a cross between Animal Crossing and Pikmin or something, that just kind of allows people in their head to go, oh, okay, I know these 2 games, and what do I kind of imagine that to be like? And then the rest of your design document can elaborate on actually what does that mean in terms of your game.
So I'm going to combine 2. So Elisa A and anonymous attendee essentially asked, basically, Elisa asked what would be the path for opening a game studio. And anonymous attendee asked, if you wanted to work as an indie developer, should you work your way up in the game industry first, or should you just go for it, set up a team? So I kind of think they can probably get answered together.
Setting up a studio, if you want to do it straight out of university, or if you don't go to university, I think the biggest thing is finding a mentor, someone who's done it before, who can share all the information that you don't have. So how they tell you how to get funding, or who you need to talk to, or they can look at your design doc and find any holes with it. I think that's the key thing, of all the knowledge that you don't currently have, getting it from somewhere else. In terms of whether you should work in the industry first, I think it really depends on what you want. For me, it really helped because I was working with people in all these different job roles that I knew nothing about. And I picked up, like, over working with other people for 10 years, I picked up knowledge about all their different, what they do as a job, that when I had to do that myself, I wasn't going in blind. So I had a bit more understanding of what I was getting into.
Yeah, I mean, Jodie's got way more to say on this, but I would agree, because I did have the same kind of thoughts coming out of university. You know, should I just have a crack on my own? But yeah, I think ultimately I'm learning much more being around way more experienced people than me. And working in amongst so many people gives you the opportunity to do job roles that are outside of your job role. So, you know, if I want to learn a bit of animation, even though I am not an animator in any way, I can just go up to someone and say, hey, how did you do that? I just want to have a go. It's cool.
All right, I'm going to combine two questions again. So we had another anonymous question who said, are there any specific types of games that you think are good to start with while you're learning to code? And we also had another question from Raphael Rayford, hopefully I said that right, which is about how do you come up with a game concept? How do you come up with a game idea? So is there a good place to start? Where would you kind of recommend people begin?
I think for programming, if you're starting from scratch, then picking a game mechanic from a small game that you can work out how it works is probably the best place to start. So it could be something like make a little version of chess or make a match 3 game. It might even be a visual novel. So you're just doing sort of a lot of narrative triggers. Being able to make something that you can compare to an existing game gives you a framework of like, right, what are the tasks or what are the functions that I'd need to make in my program to replicate this existing game. And then sort of once you're familiar with programming, then you can start kind of going, right, what are the kind of ideas that I'd want to do myself? What was the second part?
They basically said, coming up with a game's concept is hard. How do you do it?
Yes, it is. For me, it's very much what would I want to play, and are there other people who want to play that as well? So actually, the game that we're working on at the moment, our first game is Teazelcat, was inspired by the fact that I've worked on a lot of games with combat in throughout my career. And I grew up playing games with my mum, but she won't play combat games or anything that you need fast reactions for. So she plays puzzle games, she plays point and click, she plays story games. So I wanted to make something that she'd play and that there was an audience. So it wasn't necessarily targeting sort of people who were like my mum, but it was going, right, how do I make a game that appeals to an audience who doesn't want combat, who wants a nice sort of cozy story to it, and who like discovering things and maybe solving some puzzles. So I think have a target audience in mind, and if you enjoy what you're making, that's a really good start as to, is this game fun to play?
I think I can probably talk more on the programming side. So I understand if you're learning programming with the intent of wanting to be creative, like make a game or an interactive experience in some way, it can be pretty intimidating, especially if you follow a lot of tutorials that are kind of computer sciencey and just go into the technical jargon straight off. So I agree that the best thing to do, and I know this might seem like cheating, but it's really not, is to follow a game tutorial to make something simple like chess. But then once you start to realize, oh, this variable, it controls this mechanic. So maybe if I add in this extra piece of code, I can make it work a way I want it to make. And that's actually how you start to get more creative and turn it into something that's yours and not the tutorial that you're following. I mean, a recent example, I've started transitioning from C# to C++, and I've just started to make a little text adventure about going to the pub because I miss the pub. So it can be really fun. It doesn't have to be intimidating, and yeah, definitely keep it to simple tutorials and simple games, though. Don't try and go and make Skyrim off the bat.
Fantastic. Well, I hope that you got a few more of the tools and advice that you need to go forward and use all your talent. Keep creating, keep learning, and we'll be back with you very soon. Thank you very much.